Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Tensions between India and Canada continue to flare up. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called on India to cooperate with the investigation into the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. In a press conference, the Prime Minister declined to release any evidence related to the allegations. Meanwhile, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reports that Canada has gathered human intelligence and signal intelligence implicating Indian officials. CBC claims intelligence was provided by an unnamed ally in the Five Eyes Alliance. This alliance comprises of intelligence sharing network that includes United States, UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. A report by the Financial Times has said that US President Joe Biden had raised the issue with Prime Minister Modi during the G20 summit. Addressing a press conference, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the US government is giving no special exemption to India and is in touch with both countries on the matter. Joining me now to take this discussion forward is Meera Shankar, former ambassador to the United States, Michael Kugelman, director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, Ben Rowswell, convener at Network for Democratic Solidarity, and Nadira Hamid, CEO at Indo-Canadian Business Chambers. Michael, let me begin by asking you, what do you think made Trudeau go public with this allegation?
Well, thanks for having me. That's the question that everyone is asking. I, of course, don't have a clear answer, but I think there's several perspectives here. One is that Prime Minister Trudeau was so convinced that these allegations were true that he wanted to go public and make sure that the Canadian public and the world on the whole knew about them. There could also be an issue here that reflects on the very poor state of the relationship with India now. Clearly, tensions have been high for a number of months. Prime Minister Trudeau had a very unpleasant trip to India for the G20 summit, as you know. He spoke to Prime Minister Modi about his concerns on this issue of this assassination, and he clearly didn't feel pleased coming out of that. So perhaps that he felt compelled to go public just to make the Indian government look bad. We can't rule that out either. Finally, there could be some considerations about domestic politics as well, given that his popularity, public approval ratings have sunk a bit, and perhaps he wanted to do something that could produce a rally around the flag effect to get the political opposition and the country on the whole rally around him in support of him bringing out these very troubling charges.
Right. Ambassador Meera Shankar, coming to you, considering that the US, the UK, Australia have all expressed concern about these allegations, and they have privately raised this matter with India as well. How complicated a situation could this be for India, considering Canada is a G7 member and we need Canada's support in several forums?
Well, firstly, I think we have said that the allegations are not true. And secondly, I think we have said that if specific information is provided, we will look into it. So, having said that, I think there is also an Indian concern that the activities of Sikh extremists in Canada have tended to be ignored or given license. And I think that, while many countries talk about freedom of press and freedom of us, to protest, I think you have to draw the line at instigation of violence or incitement to violence and actual perpetration of violence or financing of violence in India. So I think that this is something which is a bare minimum on which all countries should agree. Otherwise, you create a culture of violence, Now, one Canadian expert was saying on a previous show that Canada does unfortunately not have any legal basis to actually take action on glorification of violence or incitement to violence. Now, if that is the case, it's a lacuna in the Canadian legal system, and we would hope that it would be addressed. Because we've seen a pattern over so many years where people who are wanted sometimes for terrorist incidents in India, go to Canada and are given asylum or are living there without any let or hindrance. And of course, we have the memory of the Kanishka bombing, where the person who was widely believed to have been the mastermind was not extradited to India, using the excuse that India did not recognize the Queen as sovereign, so the Queen of England. Therefore, the Commonwealth Extradition Treaty did not apply. So, you know, there's a long history from the Indian side as well, with very serious implications for what happens in India.
You're right, Ambassador Meera Shankar.
But also the culture which comes to prevail within Canada.
That's right, because India has been saying that we have moved at least 20 or 25 extradition requests and they have not been honored or acted upon by Canada. Nadira Hamid, if I were to ask you about the business impact, do you feel that this diplomatic row, and this is a diplomatic row like no other, do you think this could affect close India-Canada business ties in the days to come?
So, you know, India and Canada have a lot in common, and where business ties are concerned, there is so much confidence, there's so much resilience, and there's such a strong foundation that it is going to be very difficult to crack that. You know that there has been almost, I think, $125 billion trade in the last 1 year itself. That's a whopping figure, which not only has the trade and service figures, but also the amount that has been invested into India by the Canadian pension funds and the financial organizations. And these sectors have been into real estate, into infrastructure, into renewable energy. And these are very difficult, you know, to sort of, you know, they're not something that can be disturbed so readily. I agree that these are very challenging times, and we have to navigate this in a very, you know, very carefully. But that is what we are here for the, you know, the chamber to facilitate, to help, to guide, and the businesses, the pension funds. Of course, we are going to be a little cautious, maybe lie a little low, but in the end, I don't see this as impacting it in the long run.
Right. You feel that pension funds could go slow in the short term, but in the long run, the picture on India does not change. Michael Kugelman,
yes,
to get you in at this stage.
Funds, because pension funds have this
I'll come back to that point.
And they keep that.
Right. I'll come back to it. But Michael, just to ask you about how India will now work with the United States. When Jake Sullivan was asked in a press conference whether US is going to give India a free pass on this, he said that US will stand for its principles regardless of the country, and there is no special exemption for an incident of this kind. How do you think US will approach India? Do you think there could be an impact on the US-India relationship? Jaishankar is traveling to the United States. He will be meeting Antony Blinken. Do you think there will be an effort to somehow give the Indian side of the picture?
Well, indeed, the U.S. is in a very difficult spot. I mean, as we all know, it's looking at a crisis involving two close friends that also both happen to be close friends of the United States. And how does the U.S. position itself in that crisis? And I would argue that to this point, the U.S. government response to this crisis and to Prime Minister Trudeau's allegations have been quite restrained. I mean, there have been expressions of concern about the allegations from U.S. officials. And then, of course, there was indeed Sullivan's comment yesterday about, no one getting an exemption, suggesting that even though this is India, a close U.S. partner that's been accused of that, the U.S. will take these allegations very seriously. But I do not sense a risk or a threat to the U.S.-India relationship. There is just such a strong consensus here in Washington that you got to get this relationship with India right. But at the same time, Canada is a critical treaty ally of the United States, and these are very serious allegations that Canada an ally and a neighbor of the United States, has made against India. So I think that what we could see, if it's not already starting to happen, is the Biden administration trying to very quietly, through back channels, play the role of a mediator to try to encourage the two sides, at the very least, to not to take further escalatory steps that could make it even more difficult to try to rein in and ease this crisis down the road. And I think you mentioned before that the External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar is coming to the U.S. The UN General Assembly meetings happening this week and next mean that there will be senior Indian and Canadian and American diplomats in New York. There could be some opportunities to have some very brief sideline discussions. That said, the crisis is so deep right now that it may be too early to think that there could be a way through mediation to try to ease the tensions. I know that India as well has typically been a bit uncomfortable with any type of third-party mediation in its internal and bilateral disputes. But I do think that there could be a role, there should be a role, in my view, for some type of attempted U.S. mediation to, at the very least, keep the two sides from escalating to the point that things get too far out of control.
That's an important point. Meera Shankar, if I were to come to you, India has taken some retaliatory steps. One, we've asked the Canadian embassy to reduce staff here, have diplomatic parity, have the same number of diplomats as we have in our embassy and consulates in Canada. That negotiation is on. Canada has not given any answer as to how many diplomats will be reduced. On visas, we've stopped issuing all categories of visas. Canada has not done so right now. Could this lead to a larger dispute? If India stops the visas, does Canada have the right to take us to the WTO?
No, visas don't come under the WTO, but I would hope that the two countries can dial back their current tensions, because at the end of the day, it's in the interest of both countries to have a dialogue, a discrete dialogue on the issue, and for both sides to see how they can address each other's concerns. In India, there is a sense that Prime Minister Trudeau's domestic political compulsions, the fact that his government survives on the basis of support from the New Democratic Party, which is headed by a leader who has had Khalistani sympathies in the past, that this kind of creates a domestic environment which is not helpful in terms of, as I said, drawing the line at violence, at perpetration of violence and incitement to violence. And I think that is India's concern. And I'm sure the Canadian side has expressed its own concerns to our government as well. So I think there is a strong case for the two sides taking a pause and seeing how they can pick up the pieces of their relationship and begin a discrete dialogue to address their concerns. I mean, even for Canada, let's take a look. They have embraced the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. They're an active ally there. Their relations with China have been tense for some time. In this situation, one would have hoped that the relationship with India will actually become more robust. Instead, what we are seeing is that because of a domestic political issue in Canada and in India, this issue, the relationship has actually deteriorated, reaching almost a point of rupture at this stage. So I think it's in the interest of both countries to dial back the tensions and somehow find their way back to the diplomatic table.
Right. You're saying it's important for both the countries to start dialing back on the tensions. We will now head into a short break, but don't go anywhere. The discussion continues on the other side. All our guests continue to stay with us. Welcome back. We continue this conversation with Meera Shankar, former ambassador to the United States, Michael Kugelman, director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, Ben Rowswell, convener at Network for Democratic Solidarity, and Nadira Hamid, CEO at Indo-Canadian Business Chambers of Commerce. Ben, let me go across to you. How do you think Canada is going to approach this further in the days to come? Things have already worsened a lot. We're also seeing reports in the CBC that, and they're attributing to sources, that a Five Eyes ally had shared intelligence about the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and this evidence was also used by the Canadian side. But no evidence has been released in public domain. What do you think about the Canadian government stand right now and the plan of action ahead?
I think Canada faces a primordial issue of its sovereignty when it's dealing with the potential assassination of one of our citizens in our territory. There's very little room for compromise. I mean, we have a fundamental duty. Our government has a fundamental duty to protect our citizens, and so I see very little room for compromise on Canada's part. I believe that the Prime Minister is probably not providing those that evidence because every country that has any kind of serious intelligence operation has to protect its sources and its methods. But I believe that the government of Canada would not have gone to the significant step of having a Prime Minister rise in the House of Commons and make a statement that's going to complicate a relationship with one of the most important countries in the world unless it felt that the lives of its very citizens were not in danger by the actions of a foreign state, no matter how friendly that state has traditionally been to Canada.
Right. Michael, again, the same question to you. The significance of this report that a Five Eyes partner could have shared intelligence on this case with the Canadian government, the fact that the five partners had been coordinating with this for a while now, what does this indicate and what are the implications of this for India?
Well, no, I think this is this is a very important point that Canada works very closely with its Five Eyes partners, which include the United States, which I imagine is a strong candidate for the country that according to these reports, helped with Canada with intelligence, as well as the UK and Australia, also part of the Five Eyes alliance, and notably all of those countries have also dealt with the challenge of people, including citizens in their countries that espouse sentiment in favor of Sikh separatism. So it's a very complicated matter. And I agree with what the last speaker just said, that Prime Minister Trudeau strikes me as someone who is not an irresponsible leader and would not be willing to go out there and publicize these incredibly explosive allegations if he didn't think they were accurate, if he thought they were wrong, whatever the case may be. It would not make any sense. So that's why I think that these allegations that he has made need to be taken very seriously, especially because Canada can depend on some very close allies, including its neighbor, the United States, to help with and share intelligence on issues like this.
Right. Nadira, my final question to you. When you spoke about pension funds, which are the sectors which you feel are likely to get impacted from the companies which are your members? What are the kind of queries you're getting at this juncture?
So mainly at this time, with the situation changing every day and new things coming in, everybody is at this moment a little jittery, and we are getting, from the Indian companies, the big tech companies, they're worried about their people. They have projects going on. They need to send people to Canada. So they are worried about the visa issue, that will Canada retaliate by, putting down visa restrictions, like as we have done the Indian visas for Canadians coming into India. Those are one of the questions. Also, of course, from the big, the companies who are expecting the investments and who are in talks with the pension funds, there is always a little bit of anxiety as to how things will turn out and whether they will continue investing into India. So, and of course, from the pension funds and the big companies that have already invested into India, they are, a little cautious, I would say. But on the whole, we have been talking to companies, to pension funds, to financial organizations, and we are seeing that there is, I wouldn't say positive, but at the same time, people are calm. People are not going overboard. And I would just say that let us, the thing to do at this time is just to lie low. But I, personally feel, and I think that is from the information gathered. We have been in close talks with the High Commission, both the Indian High Commission, the Canadian High Commission, as well as companies on both sides. And we just feel that we just need to wait this out. But in the long run, we don't see the business impact too much. Trade, of course, is going to be a little bit, but with the trade talks having paused as well between India and Canada, but into the big investments, the big, the big business deals that are going on, hopefully, and keeping our fingers crossed that whatever the government situation will be, whatever happens, we're just hoping that we ride over this storm.
All right, we've run out of time, but Nadira Hamid, Ben Rowswell, Michael Kugelman, and Meera Shankar, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye. We've come to the end of our program, and we hope there will be de-escalation on both sides. Now, during the week, at the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, the Climate Ambition Summit also convened in New York. This comes at a time when the world is seeing its hottest ever year. Top emitters, US, China and India gave the summit a miss. Radhika Udas gets you key highlights on the climate front from the UNGA. From extreme heat waves to unprecedented storms and rains, the year 2023 is seeing climate-induced catastrophes having a global impact. The world's collective effort to stop climate change has fallen short drastically, as pointed out by the UN Secretary General.
Humanity has opened the gates of hell. Horrendous heat is having horrendous effects. The move from fossil fuels to renewables is happening, but we are decades behind. We must make up time lost to foot dragging, arm twisting, and the naked greed of entrenched interests raking in billions from fossil fuels.
The net zero ambition of 2030 by wealthy nations is well off record as per UN's analysis. China, United States, United Kingdom, Japan and India gave the summit a miss. Together, China, US and India account for about 42% of greenhouse gas emissions and are the top three emitters. Many poorer island nations who are bearing the brunt of climate crisis are angry that the promised $100 billion in financing has not materialized.
Neither Africa nor the developing world stands in need of charity, handouts or harms from the developed countries. What we need is fairness, a fair financial system, fair market access for green assets, products and services.
Everyone here says they're committed to 1.5, but the actions we take will speak louder. We call for a fossil fuel phase out and demand that abatement technology not be used to greenlight continued expansion.
The world is headed for 2.8 degrees Celsius warming if leaders don't act now, warns the UN Secretary General. He also announced earlier that climate breakdown has begun and the era of global boiling is here. The next crucial meet of leaders will now be at the COP28 in Dubai from 30th November, where climate justice and reducing emissions will dominate the agenda. With Radhika Udas, this is Parikshit Luthra for CNBC TV18. Yes, this was a conversation at the G20 and will be a big conversation at COP28. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. News continues on CNBC TV18. Stay tuned.